I think a lot of us have way too much stuff. Until we're emotionally prepared to get rid of some of the things we've collected over the years, we need a good place to store them. Safe and strong heavy-duty shelving can be kind of expensive and hard to find, so I'm going to show you how you can make your own using just 2 tools, a circular saw and a power drill, and for a lot less than you can buy most ready-made units. So if you've never tackled a DIY project before, or even if you're a pro, this would be a great project to handle this weekend. Hands down, the easiest way to use a circular saw is to first pick up a piece of rigid foam insulation. You can buy foam insulation in different sized panels at almost any home improvement store. Once I moved my full plywood sheet into position, I measured it to cut it into 4 2-foot by 4-foot panels. I then set the blade of my circular saw slightly deeper than the 1/2-inch plywood I was using. The foam insulation supporting the plywood allowed me to make smooth and even cuts safely without worrying about the blade cutting into the concrete or the surface below. Once the plywood was cut, it was time to turn my attention to the 2x4s. The first step was to cut 21-inch long short side rails off of 4 of the 2x4 legs. To save time and to prevent repetitive measuring, whenever possible, I'd like to line all my boards up and mark them all at the same time. This also helps to reduce the possibility of small measuring errors on each board. Next, I adjusted the depth on my circular saw and then used a speed square to help me cross-cut the boards where I had made my marks. Make sure to check the description box for a link to my website where I have the full free building plans with all the measurements and a cut list. I used the same foam insulation and circular saw to cut all my 2x4 members down to length. With all my pieces cut, it was time to start assembly. A really important step that's sometimes overlooked by DIYers and weekend warriors is making sure to apply a healthy amount of glue to all your joints. I also made sure to pre-drill through the longer sides and into the ends of the shorter rails. Glue holds the wood together tightly and helps prevent future squeaking and wobbling from screws and fasteners coming loose. Wood really likes to split, especially when you're drilling close to the ends, so pre-drilling makes sure that your screws or your fasteners can go through the wood without cracking it. I created rectangular frames for my 2x4s, and then it was time to cover them with a sheet of plywood. I lowered one of the plywood panels on top of each frame and secured it with more glue and 1 1/4-inch wood screws driven from the top into the frame. I put together 4 separate shelving assemblies and then moved on to the legs. I really wanted to make sure that my shelving unit sat as square as possible, so a good way to help with that is to make sure that each shelf is attached at the exact same position on each of the 4 legs. Once again, I found it easy to measure once and then make my marking for where the shelves would sit across all 4 legs at the same time. I started with the back 2 legs spread about 48 inches apart and laying face down on my work surface. I then applied glue to the area where I was going to attach my first shelf. I moved the shelf in place and used a speed square to make sure that the shelf was exactly perpendicular to the legs. I pre-drilled and then drove 2 1/2-inch screws from the inside frame of the shelf into the back side of the legs. Next, I moved to the opposite end of the legs and started to attach my top shelf. I checked for square again, pre-drilled, and then drove 2 2.5-inch screws into each joint. Liking what you see? Make sure you tag that thumbs up button. I added the other 2 shelves, following the same steps, and then it was time to bring in the front 2 legs. I applied a healthy amount of glue on the legs and then lowered them into position on top of the shelves. I'll give you this little hint. Sometimes on a soft wood like this pine I was using, you can use self-tapping screws and they won't split the wood. But I would do a test piece just to be sure, and don't get angry with me if you decide not to pre-drill and your wood still splits. Once the legs were secured in place, the one step that I forgot to film was to measure opposite corners of the shelving unit just to make sure that everything was square. Whenever you're building a square or rectangular shaped piece of furniture, if you measure diagonally across the back and the measurements are the same, then you know all 4 corners of the unit are square at 90 degrees. Once the shelving unit was built, it was a little too heavy for me to lift. Trust me, I tried, and so I recruited my father-in-law to help me stand it up. I've got a lot of heavy stuff to store, so I had to double check to make sure that the shelves would be strong enough. I'm happy to report they passed. I've built about half a dozen of these shelving units over the years, and they are super handy for holding all the really heavy tools, paint cans, and all that other junk that people store in their garage. Besides being less expensive than metal shelves, wood is really convenient because you can just add a nail or a screw and hang whatever you need onto the side as well. I use these shelves in my garage, but they would be great in a basement or storage room as well.